Let's go to Junkyard Dog. So, Greg, keep on with your line of thought there about Sylvester.
Yeah, so here's the way I frame it. Growing up in Houston or growing up with my dad in Houston, my favorite football player was Earl Campbell, right? Now, Earl Campbell had about a 9-year career and he petered out when he got to the Saints, and his last year with the Oilers wasn't great. But, for 7 or 8 years, he had 2,000 yards rushing and he was like nothing we had ever seen. And, he was a first ballot Hall of Famer in the NFL. Now, think about if Earl Campbell had to keep playing football after his body gave out, and he had to earn a living through football, and he ended up, in the World Football League or something like that, or Football League Europe, and the last view you got of him was as a 40-year-old man who couldn't gain 3 yards. Sometimes we have that view of the wrestlers, and it's unfortunate. And with Sylvester, I feel like he gets judged on the last 5 or 10 years of his career, when what we miss is how spectacular the first 10 years of his career were. And again, like I said with Gorilla, there's three or four elements that you really have to consider. And the first one is the historic nature. You know, you talk about the territory system, and, Tony, you and I are the Southern wrestling people. Black wrestling in the South was on par of, the women's wrestling or the little people wrestling. It was an attraction that you brought in to help, bring in extra fans, to bring in different fans, to bring in the black fans. But it was not integrated in the 40s and 50s. And, in the 50s, it starts to get integrated. But it really was a very different thing. And so you didn't have territories. I was thinking about this. You could have a territory with a Hispanic champion. So you could have, a brown skinned person who was the head of the territory, but you didn't get a territory with a black wrestler, with a black baby face. We could talk about the Sheik as a brown skinned person as well, but he was a heel. And that territory was centered around the owner of the territory, who was a
Mhm.
heel, obviously. But to have a black baby face be the center of the territory was not something that happened. I mean, Bobo was second in the Detroit territory, right? And he was the baby face who only got the run, when it was convenient because of the news, or, because of what else was going on. The Bearcats, were featured attractions, but nobody ever made them the star of the territory. Same with Sailor Art, right? One time in the entire territory system it happens. And somehow it was in Louisiana and Mississippi, for goodness sakes. And it happened with one guy, and that was Sylvester Ritter. But even that's missing kind of, the full arc of his run. He starts when he gets out of trying to make it in football in 76, 77. He's not an instant sensation. I mean, he's in the business, by all accounts, for 6 months, and he doesn't know how to work. But everybody sees something in him. They send him from North Carolina to, famously, he has the run with McGurk where he loses all his matches. I think I heard them say the other day 69 straight matches, before we sent him away and told him to go learn how to work. So they send him to Memphis. They send him to Memphis. Everybody thinks he can't work. He's in a semi-main event 6 months into the business with Tommy Rich against the Bicentennial Kings. They send him to Knoxville. He learns how to work in Knoxville, in a mid-card capacity, working with Ron, working with Rick Collins, is what Bo James told us, the first guy to say, "Hey, are you smart?" But again, then they send him to Mississippi. He starts to get semi-main events, main events. A year into the business, he's with Nick Gulas, and he's Leroy Rochester. He wins his first title on Christmas night with Gypsy Joe, basically a year into the business, maybe 13 months into the business. And then he's a regular with Gulas. And, talk about missing footage. My holy grail of missing footage is now Mid-America from 1977 with Randy Savage and Bobby Eaton and Lanny Poffo and Pez Whatley and
Dutch
Junkyard
Mantel.
Dog as Leroy Rochester and Andre the Giant coming into feud with him. I saw somebody making fun. It was a Meltzer thing, of course, of Andre and JYD in 1987, and I was thinking, yeah, you might not want to watch that match, but you know what I would like to see? Uh, Andre the Giant and Leroy Rochester from Birmingham or Chattanooga in 1977. I would love to see those matches with JYD as a heel for the, in his first big run, and Andre coming in to deal with big bad Leroy Rochester. So that's his second year in the business. Then he goes to Calgary 2 years into the business. He's North American champion. We all think the world of Calgary, right? What does it tell you that they, took him in, and he filled a spot. They needed a guy in that spot, but they didn't have to keep him a year, and they didn't have to make him North American champion twice. And like I said recently on my podcast, when they go back into Montana for the first time, I think they said for the first time in 15 years they were in Billings, Montana. The main event was Harley Race and Junkyard Dog, or Big Daddy Ritter for the NWA World Title. So that's 1978. That's before he is 3 years into the business. He's getting NWA title matches against Harley Race. I found a match that was him and Dynamite Kid against Bret Hart and Jake Roberts. How much would you like to see that match? And the week before, when they got crossed up because it was two singles matches that became a tag team match, and then what becomes of the tag team match. So again, that's 3 years into the business.